Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority Board of Directors meeting. It is Thursday, December 19th, and we have a quorum present. First thing on the agenda as an opening item is to approve the agenda. I do want to make one note that under monitoring 4.1, it should say Carpenter and not Mozak. Other than that, on my end, the agenda looks good. How about everybody else? Matt?
For item 6.1, Mr. Yang can't be with us this evening. He's feeling under the weather. Mr. Hess will be making that presentation.
Oh, thank you so much. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Seeing none, does anyone like to make a motion to approve the agenda with the corrections as noted? Oh, yes, Deb? Oh, okay. Mike, and seconded by Rich. All those in favor, raise your hand. And that passed unanimously. I'm going to assume that's a raised hand, Jesse. Thank you. Next on our agenda is the public comment. We welcome all members of the public who have come to address the board. The board will listen respectfully to your concerns without comment. Matters of operational concern will be referred to our CEO for follow-up consideration. All persons wishing to make public comment, please state your name for the record, and each speaker will have a maximum of 3 minutes. In-person attendees, if you want to let Deb know that you are interested in making a comment, and if there's anyone online, please click the raise hand icon. Deb, is there anybody online?
Yes, we have Robert Pulowski, and you are unmuted.
Thank you, Deborah. Good evening to members of the board and staff. Robert Pulowski here, transit advocate and rider, calling in from Southgate, Wayne County. My apologies for my voice. I'm a little under the weather myself. I couldn't be there in person. Just a couple questions, more of points made. As we get into the new year, there's a lot of new projects that our systems are looking to do, especially the RTA. For one example, the mobility wallet project. As you know, the RTA has approved a vendor that will take on a study that will go forth all the way into spring of 2025. They are gathering input from all of the service providers and getting feedback and insight on how that would work. My question to the staff or the board, if they've been even briefed on this, and if so, because I know that we do not have connections between Smart and Ann Arbor just yet, but does TheRide have an open opportunity to look at possibly opting into a universal fare system under the RTA to make fare payment a little bit easier while integrating the services as well? I would like a follow-up if possible, working with the staff, because I've been trying to get answers on this for weeks and I have not heard anything back, not even from the RTA as well. On a second note, I want to close out with all of the progress that you have shown this year with the launch of the 104 Express. It was truly a remarkable route that was needed definitely in the Ypsilanti Ann Arbor area, and I'm glad to see it being able to serve its customers and serve college students and residents all across the county. Most of all, we passed a huge budget to be able to fund transit for another year while looking at investing projects long term. I'm very grateful for the progress and the transparency from the board and the staff to get the feedback and insight from us riders and advocates going long term. Thank you for all that you do, and I look forward to seeing you all in Ypsilanti next year. Have a great holiday.
Thank you, Mr. Pulowski. Deb, is there anyone else online?
We have no others.
Is there anyone in the gallery who would like to make a public comment? Seeing none, we'll close out public comment. Thank you, everyone. Next is 1.3, general announcements. Are there any general announcements this evening? Seeing none, we'll close out general announcements and move on to our consent agenda. And that agenda is the board meeting minutes from November 21st and our committee meeting summaries. Would someone like to move that and make a motion? That would be Mr. Simibar, seconded by Mr. Jesse Miller. And is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll take the vote. All those in favor, raise your hands. And that passed unanimously. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to ownership linkage, and that is Mr. Rich Chang.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Just two quick updates. Matt and Jeff actually met with the Ann Arbor, presented in front of the Ann Arbor Council this past Monday. Gave an update there. And then we actually have a meeting scheduled with a small group of us with the Ypsi Township folks on January 8th. So we look forward to that meeting. And that's all I have.
Are there any questions for Mr. Chang? Seeing none, we'll move on. And the next report is from the LAC, and that was going to be Miss Andrea Henry. I want to take this moment to remind the board that the LAC is now under the purview of the CEO, and he's been working with them. We do have a policy about the LAC in our policy manual that talks about our relationship with them. And one of the things that we asked is to hear their concerns about the ends. And so that's what they're here to speak about. It's a little bit different in that it's not public comment. We've actually asked to hear from them. And so there is an opportunity for the board to be able to engage with the LAC members who are here and ask questions. And I want to welcome Andrea Henry, who is online, and she is the chair of the LAC, as well as Rebecca Burke. And then we also have Mr. Clark Chartneski in person with us. So welcome all.
Rebecca and Andrea, you're both unmuted, just so you know.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so my name is Andrea Henry. As Kathleen said, I am the current chair of the LAC. I can talk a little bit about the process, or I can refer to the document that is part of your board packet on page 18. I can try to answer any comments or questions or feedback you all might have. We've never done this before, so I'm kind of going to look to all of you for what it is you do or do not want to know from us today.
Ms. Henry, if we could maybe have you just give a little bit of feedback about the report that you have brought before us, maybe hit the highlights for us, and we can generate discussion from there.
Sure.
Get it
So-
under control for the American people. We have a mandate to do so. President Trump receives
So the document is a highlight of the thoughts and concerns and feedback from the LAC over the course of about a 6-month period of time. We really started diving into this during the summer using last fiscal year's information, with the understanding that it's pretty comparable to the current fiscal year information. This is version 3 of this document, so there were lots of discussions, lots of learning, lots of different ways that we had to sort of wrap our heads around doing something that was very new to the LAC. I think for us, the 2 things that stick out to me, or 3 things that stick out to me, is that the one thing that was sort of on the table for us from the very first conversation we had up through our last conversation about what we were going to bring to the board for today, which our last meeting was about a week ago, was the accessibility issue of the bus stops and the sidewalks. Knowing that the current projection was to complete this work by 2033, and that the LAC would make the recommendation and is of the opinion that that is too far in the future, and would like to see that potentially moved up to something closer to 2030. The other thing that came to light when we were reviewing the treatment of the traveling public was to make sure that the printed materials and all the other materials were cognizant of the deaf and hard of hearing population. And then just generally overall, our feedback as a whole across all of the ends and information that we reviewed was that we wanted to just stress the importance that the implementation of these changes and the moving up of timelines and increasing accessibility not only benefits the disability population that is the focus of the LAC, but it benefits the community as a whole. So it isn't quite the narrow focus that it might seem to be on paper. I think that's all I have to say at the moment, unless my colleagues in the room or online have something they want to add.
Mr. Chartneski or Ms. Burke? Go ahead, Clark.
Hi, I'm Clark Chernesky. Yeah, there was one other area we got into discussion, and that had to do with the booking for the A-Ride program. And we, in discussion with Matt and with the rest of the staff, we were able to get things ironed out there, the concerns that we had, and didn't have to go into the ends policies in order to take care of that. And I just want to mention that in the case of the bus stops, we realize that we're not in a position as an LIC to say exactly where the funds should be spent. It's your responsibility to evaluate all the needs and decide where to allocate your resources. But we do want you to keep in mind that we believe that the bus stop program upgrading to ADA standards should come sooner if possible. And that should be a high priority. And like many things that improvements made to be ADA compliant, for example, curb cuts. Curb cuts not only benefit people in a wheelchair, but people with baby buggies, people younger, especially younger people on bicycles, and just in general makes it easier. And I can think of, for example, a bus stop that is not ADA compliant. It's on Nixon Road by Parkway Meadows. And there's no sidewalk leading up to the bus stop. And this is not only a nuisance for anybody in a wheelchair, but also just the traveling public in general. And so now that's going to be taken care of with the Nixon Road upgrades that the city is working on. And we did not, in the part of 2.1.2, traveling public, treatment of the traveling public, that except for the thing that Andrea mentioned, that we didn't have any problem with the written material saying that it was compliant. So I just wonder if you have any particular questions that I could perhaps help answer.
Yes, let's go ahead. Did Rebecca want to add anything before we take questions? So far, no. So far, no. Okay. Well, then let's open it up to the board. And do you have any questions for our LAC members with regards to the information that they provided to us? Jesse?
Thank you so much to the LAC for taking the time to go through this. It's something that we've all been thinking about and looking forward to. I wanted to ask a couple of questions on the points that you had brought up. First, with the ADA accessible like bus stops, this is something that the board has discussed rather explicitly for years, and where we tend to get caught up is wanting to find an empirical measure or standard that we could use to other than the ADA to for this that the CEO or that staff could use to assess whether or not our facilities and properties are accessible. We are so far unaware of anything. I think there is a general acceptance that the ADA is kind of the lowest of low bars and doesn't actually cover everything that we probably wanted to. But in wanting to provide clear direction to staff, we don't have an alternative empirical measurement. And I was wondering if that was something, obviously not the responsibility of the LAC to determine, but if anyone happened to know of that, so I guess I'm saying that by ways of an explanation as to why we have tended to accept this particular interpretation, but also to see if anyone on the LAC knows how we might be able to improve.
Well, we do plan to have in one of our meetings in the next 6 months, we want to devote time to talking about bus stops and having a person or people at AATA staff that is involved in this to meet with us. I'm on the LAC for the Smart Bus Company, Bus Authority as well, and I know that they're doing an inventory of bus stops. I don't know exactly how this gets into details, the ride determines what should be done. Like you mentioned, the ADA is one thing, but then there are other things like shelters, a bench or so forth. I'm getting up in age and it's a little harder for me to stand for long periods of time, and I appreciate having a bench or something to sit on. And so there are things beyond ADA, like you say. But this is something we do want to look into within the next 6 months.
Thank you. So, and so do we. And I just realized that the second thing I was thinking of is actually for staff. So that actually is all I have. So thank you.
Okay.
Sounds good. Do we have any other questions for the LAC at this time? Seeing none,
Yeah.
thank you very much. Oh, you have something else,
Yeah,
Clark?
I just have one comment.
Okay.
And we have this policy governance and the ends and so forth. And sometimes there are issues that we think of that there's a problem area that should be worked on, but it doesn't necessarily fall within the importance perhaps of the ends policies. And one that I have a special interest has to do with public transportation, intercity public transportation. And there's one thing, 1.3.3, visitors using public transportation in the area and intercity carriers. And the Amtrak station here not only serves Amtrak, but intercity carriers like Greyhound and Miller and Barron Bus. And if you look at other cities in Michigan, Detroit, for example, their Amtrak station is on Woodward Avenue, fortunately, and there's DDOT buses, smart buses, and the Q line. If you look at Kalamazoo, Battle Creek, Grand Rapids, for example, the Amtrak station also coincides with their main bus transfer point, like Blake is here. And because of peculiarities of location here, especially the Broadway Bridge and so forth, Ann Arbor is served by essentially only one bus stops right in front of the Amtrak station, and that is the outbound Newport bus, which also does not run on weekends. Otherwise, it's hard to find a bus stop. I've seen a lot of people standing there hoping to catch a bus downtown. They don't want to go away from downtown. I have to tell them, well, the bus stop is about 2 blocks away, and if it's on a weekend, that bus doesn't run. So something has to be done here, and I'm hoping in the next year to work with administration and staff to try to see if we can improve the situation there. And but it doesn't rise to the point of saying that non-compliant in that area. So.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
Just to be sure, Ms. Henry, did you have anything else you would like to add, or Ms. Burke, have you thought of something?
No, I just would like to thank Matt and the LAC for taking the time to support the LAC and our feedback. And we will continue to work at this process and make these reports on a yearly basis. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you. Very good. Moving on, we're going to move to the ends report, and that is Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. We have our annual ends report for your consideration this evening. The report really, I'll draw your attention to page 22, which is our famous stoplight assessment of how things are going. We are reporting overall partial compliance. It really comes down to report of partial compliance with policy 113, which is our latest ends policy. That's the safety policy. That one is partially compliant because we do not yet have a target for what I would broadly characterize as security-related concerns. And this is on the objective measure. We're looking for something of what is normal in this space in our industry. We haven't found that yet, but I'm sure we will uncover something. But until we do, and which we expect to be by the next report, and you'll see that in the timeline for this one, which I believe is on page 41. Then that will, we hope, be compliant. That would make policy 1.1 be compliant, and the entire policy would be compliant. So otherwise, that is what we are reporting. So I would, aside from that, draw your attention to your survey responses. And I won't go through them in detail. I think it would be more appropriate for you yourselves to lead that conversation. But I will note that there were, I think, a lot and many substantive comments about the ends. I would say this is the most feedback and the most pushback the board has given on the ends report through the survey. And it's wonderful to see that you guys are really doing your homework. To try to simplify some of it, we very belatedly prepared for you some written material. It's at your spots at the table this evening, where you can see staff's written responses in red italics to some of them. Many of the issues, are what I would characterize as smaller. Thank you for the typos that were caught. There were a couple of inconsistencies. Thank you. We will make sure that those get ironed out. But I think I would like to just draw attention to some of what I consider the more substantive comments that were made. I won't go into detail. It's subject to your conversation, but I will note the new safety policy certainly got a lot of attention. There were a lot of comments pertaining to the interpretation and the evidence in that area. We welcome, we'd love to hear your discussion on that space. Interestingly, this year, there was a lot of questions about visitors, which was not something we'd seen in previous years, although the interpretation is broadly the same. So we're interested in that. There were scattered throughout questions about the adequacy of interpretations. For example, why aren't we looking at ridership from college towns, particularly as a piece of evidence? And looking at that comment, we said, I don't know that that's so much the evidence as it is the interpretation. The interpretation doesn't specifically say, we look at college towns, we look at national peer averages for comparison. So we think that's maybe a little bit of both. There were two sets of commenters from the board, of which we had 8 participants, thank you, where the questions really sort of circled the question of what does it mean to allow full participation in society? Do we provide service to polling locations? Do we provide service to pharmacies? Do we capture everyone who's looking for a job? And it really came down to I think, what did the board mean by full participation in society? And I think you could have substantive discussions around that as well. So with that, Madam Mayor, I'll sort of close my comments. Thank you for this. We're very open to any questions or feedback we can provide, some of which is in the written supplemental material. But there's a lot for you to chew on here. And we look forward to being as helpful as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter, and I appreciate the upgrade. I wasn't elected, but we'll take mayor. Going for a little
Old
levity
habits,
here.
sorry.
Oh, well, this looks like it's going to be a very interesting evening. I'd like to open it up for discussion to the board to talk with the CEO about any concerns that you may have that are with regards to reasonableness and also the interpretations. And we might want to think as we're talking and buttonhole any discussions where we may think that we as a board might want to take on policy changes. We'll have that discussion at another agenda item later down the line. So let's open it up to the board and get this discussion going. It looks like it's going to be interesting. I hope. Although now it looks quiet. Yes, Jesse.
I think I'm just a little bit daunted on where to start, and I'm wondering if maybe if we could go through policy by policy, since there have been comments on just about every aspect. I think it may be in order to have a directed conversation, it might be beneficial to maybe just go down and see what the issues, or if anyone wants to discuss the issues that have been brought up for each policy.
If everybody will entertain that, I'll get us started. Are there any questions or concerns about policy 1.0 that you'd like to address now that were not answered in this new document from the CEO?
I mean, I just had a
Mr.
general comment, because actually I was thinking the same approach that Jesse was. Because I think the ones that we definitely don't show 100% interpretation reasonable, I think we definitely should chat about those, but I'm not sure if some of the folks that said it was not reasonable are present. So I just want to say that I think it's worthwhile for us to definitely go through this policy by policy, especially the ones that are not 100%.
Policy 1.0 was 75% of the board members found that the interpretation was reasonable, which means that 25% did not, but it was 100% that they found the evidence verifiable. We don't have to discuss every item, but that one shows 75%, so I thought we would take a crack at it, but we don't have to. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, 1.0 is really the overall overriding policy, and it's kind of, I think, pretty well handled if we discuss these sub-policies.
Okay, then let's go on to 1.1. We had 50% of the board members found the interpretation reasonable and 88% found the evidence verifiable. Was an area that you wanted to talk about tonight, or did you find the answers in red that were provided by the CEO as substantial enough to not warrant conversation? And I'll be happy to give everybody a minute. We do not have to rush this at all. Yes, Jesse.
I think I can start off because I was one of the board members that made a comment about whether everything that was encompassed in full participation in society was included in the CEO's interpretation. In particular, we've had a lot of conversations lately because it's an election year about polling locations, and it has been identified by staff that we are not certain that all polling locations are served by our public transit options. And then also whether that would be necessary, whether full participation in, well, I guess so the questions that I'm curious about are, is the ability to vote a requisite for full participation in society? And I tend to feel that it is. And then, well, I guess maybe I'll just start off with that. I personally feel that the polling locations, that this is we're taught from a very early age as a fundamental aspect, that and jury duty are the two direct forms of civic engagement that every citizen has access to. I'm just, maybe I don't know if it'd be best to hear from other board members or ask the staff to respond.
I think I'd like to know how many people share that same concern, and is it problematic that it's not used as evidence? And if it is problematic, in what way is it problematic? Yes, Rich.
So I agree with Jesse overall, and I think we need to talk about the interpretation of participation in society, because actually one of my comments at the very end, I brought up other stuff like pharmacies, doctor's office, all that kind of stuff. But I think in this first phase, we're just really trying to figure out, is the current interpretation reasonable? And so that's why I liked how you said the next step will actually be to talk about the policy. And so I guess the question I have for Jesse, is this something that you think is a blocker for us saying that this interpretation is reasonable? Or is that something to discuss broader policy? Because the other issues I want to bring up, I think, should also be included, including polling stations and those other locales.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to see whether or not we end up having a debate about this, and because if it was a self-evident thing to the rest of the board that being able to vote is part of full participation in society, then I think it's then not on us to develop new policy. It's to say, sorry, this does not meet the definition of any reasonable interpretation. We think any reasonable interpretation would have to include the providing access to voting. I think this is complicated by the fact of new Michigan election laws have made voting more accessible through other means other than physical presence. And it would, so that probably also, I don't think that muddies the issue, but if voting is very clearly to all of us part of participating in full participation in society, then we can ask the question whether we think that has been met by other means, and it's not necessarily our responsibility because the state has provided other equitable options for participation. I guess those two things kind of play, but I do think they do go to the fundamental question of, is this interpretation reasonable?
Yes, Rich.
So I do think that polling station access is a very important part of participation in society. But I guess the thing I want to be fair about is that we did bring this up with the CEO and the staff at prior board meeting, like right before the election. I think we concluded that we weren't going to be sticklers about that for this particular voting cycle, because there was a lot of questions and everything. So I would be curious to see if we can maybe say that this is something that we want to have as part of a future, like even just next year's monitoring report is something that's included in that, because there were other points of interest, for instance, that I was also very interested in, because I'm looking at this from the standpoint of people that don't have any type of access except for bus. What can they actually access? Like doctor's office, urgent care, pharmacies, that kind of thing. Which is why I think there's a bigger policy discussion around that definition of what is participation in society and what all does it include. But then I sit there and go like, oh gosh, I got to abstract this up into something potentially that the CEO kind of knows what we're looking for, but we're not being prescriptive as to what we want it to actually do.
I think I would agree with that, except that the current interpretation does use very specific things like access to schools and hospitals. So that door's already been opened. And then I would push back on the idea of accepting this and then requesting a fleshing out or a different interpretation next year. I don't think it's reasonable for us to say, well, this one's okay, but next year it's not going to be okay. I kind of feel like we need to speak clearly to staff and set the expectation. Like, if we feel that that we need something about this changed, let's just say it now and have staff come back to us rather than I feel like to accept it now, but also have this little addendum to say, actually, it's not really okay. We're hoping you're making it better, that you'll make it better next year, is the kind of ambiguity that we're looking to avoid. That's that subjective ambiguity. So I'd rather that the board speak clearly on whether or not we actually think this meets the standard of any reasonable interpretation.
If I might add to that, we do have another alternative that hasn't been spoken about, and that is if the board as a whole agrees when we're voting that we all agree that polling places are a vital part of being able to participate in society and that we want to see that data, we can ask for data at any time. We can say, we accept this policy except for this item as noted as not being a reasonable interpretation, and the CEO needs to come back in whatever amount of time we say, 3 months, 1 month, 6 months, whatever, and we want to have that data about polling places. So that is another option that we have to us. Yes, Ms. Duran.
I would just add that polling places can change at the last minute. Not last minute, because the clerk, at least in Ann Arbor, I can speak for, is excellent at letting people know when that's happening with notice. But they do change, and there are so many of them. So I do think that there are a lot of accommodations afforded by the state, and if we were to ask for I look at government destinations. To me, I also think about some of the early voting sites, and there are just a handful of those, and that may be more reasonable in terms of if we were asking for data, maybe just to the places where people can go for whatever it is, 9 days in advance of an election, because I personally volunteered visiting polling places on election day, and this was in Detroit, but I covered a tiny little amount of it, and I went to 19 different polling places that day. That would be, I would think, maybe an unreasonable metric, and one that varies.
Simi or Mike? Jeff, or Jesse, or Rich, do you have any comments to what Ms. Grant said?
I definitely I don't disagree with any of that, but again, in terms of wanting to be clear, you're also still like, well, do you think that access to polling locations is like part of fully participating in society, is required? And that's kind of what I'm wanting to get to, is not the reason, not making reasons or excuses why it's not included, but is it actually part of full participation in society? Because it's not our job to make the rationale for or to come up with the interpretations. But I did find voting so fundamental that its omission next to employment, education, medical, shopping, and government destinations particularly notable.
If I'm remembering my civics well enough, I vote here in Ann Arbor. I know that if you can't get to your polling place, you can always get to your city clerk. And I know that the city clerk's offices are all on bus lines, aren't they, in Ypsilanti and Ypsilanti Township? So, and then we have the mailing and all of the other things in the state of Michigan that are available. I hear Ms. Grant's point of view in terms of there are hundreds of polling places, and how would we ascertain, what would we be asking the CEO to do in terms of, are we asking him just to put in that we're thinking about polling places? Are we asking him to quantify, we will get to 100% of the polling places or only 75%? I need some help understanding what we're asking for. But you're not sure?
No, I guess I actually don't think that's really our responsibility. I think my question, I want to bring it back to is it reasonable? Is it possible for any reasonable interpretation of this policy to exclude polling locations? Regardless of the difficulty of pulling that information, that's not our responsibility. But just that question, is it reasonable to not include voting?
Yes, Simi.
Yeah, I think for me, participating in voting is a core piece of participation in society, but I do not think that means that any reasonable interpretation does not include that. So I was one of the people that finded the interpretation reasonable.
Yes, Mr. Carpenter?
At the risk of stepping into the fray, I want to agree with Jesse on several points. The most important, which is I really appreciate it when the board is clear. Knowing your expectations in advance is a huge help in terms of charting the direction and meeting your expectations. And if the board wants to be clear about expectations for polling locations, pharmacies, anything else, I would welcome knowing what your expectations are in those respects. But I will disagree with Jesse about sort of the mechanics of how this is being discussed. In the monitoring report, you've written the words that I go by, full participation in society, and I've given you interpretation. To Simi's point, did that any reasonable interpretation, not one person's acceptable interpretation? I would argue that I met that definition of any reasonable interpretation. If it is not what you as a body want to see going forward, that's probably a policy writing thing. And I would welcome your clarity on that. My concern is falling into a trap of we'll know it when we see it, because there's no word on here that says polling station. I couldn't have reasonably anticipated that expectation if I'd known. Sure. I also am a little concerned if polling stations can sort of retroactively be forced into the interpretation, why not pharmacies? Why not hairdressers? If you want those things, please let me know. Just itemize them specifically in the policy, but I think it's a question of writing what you want clearly in the policy versus pushing it into any reasonable interpretation. So it's a mechanics issue.
Did you want to? Yes.
Yeah, so I think this is why I'm interested in hearing board members' opinions on whether or not it is reasonable. Because if we were to unanimously say, no, a reasonable interpretation of full participation in society includes access to voting, then I might use that as evidence, as an argument to say this actually isn't any reasonable, because if there was a unanimity of opinion among this group of voices, I think to me that would demonstrate that it doesn't actually meet that.
But if there's unanimity, why not just change the policy and be clear?
Mike.
Because we should, okay.
Yes, please.
Is that okay?
Of course.
Yeah, particularly based on Jesse's comment right now, I'll say I felt, and I considered it quite a bit, that this was a definition of any reasonable interpretation. I mean, we're back in the same question that we've been wrestling with, but that fell within my definition, is something acceptable.
Yes, Rich?
So just outside of this particular issue, I think this brings to light again, like a constant battle I think we have. Because if you remember, like at the last board meeting, I can't remember exactly what policy it was, but there is something that, I think it was a figure, an interpretation where I was like, well, I think we should have like a minimum percentage or something. And I was told, whoa, that's being a little too precise. And that's the part I think I'm grappling with this one. Is just like, what is the level of precision? And this one, to go with actually what both Matt and Jesse are saying, like we could actually create a very long list of like, here's all the things that we consider part of participatory requirements for society. Because for me, I think I'm defining that as life or death. And some people might argue that is voting really? I view it as a right, and it does affect life and death because there's policies and stuff around there. So I think giving people the ability to be able to vote is really important. But then I sit there and go like, man, we could end up with like 50 items on this. And maybe that is something we need to do, but that's the part that I grapple is like, how precise should we be? And do we need to be for this? And in this particular case, I'm looking at like forward versus backwards. And that's what we were talking about, like monitoring report is the past. And I would say that, yes, this is a reasonable interpretation based on the information that was presented. However, moving forward, I don't think it's reasonable to continue that same interpretation, say for next year. That's what I was saying, like, I would like to see some changes for the next year, because frankly, in regards to polling stations, I don't know what change, like Matt, the CEO and the staff are gonna do around elections. They're already done. We have another one coming in 2 years, but I think that's something I would like to see some plan in place that over the next 2 years, this becomes something that they do pay close attention to. Because we've brought it up multiple times. I know you've even brought it up before I even joined the board. So it's been a long-standing kind of debate, and maybe now is the time that we can actually get something policy-wise to rise it up.
So I think actually why I'm wanting us to push into the reasonableness of this interpretation is because I don't want to get into a situation where we are feeling a need to illustrate every single individual point. with the polling location, I was being very specific as something that is fundamental to a democracy, not, like, we cannot have leaders who, without elections, it actually is very much a deep, and so I wanted to, kind of point this out as an potential oversight in any reasonable definition, whereas getting into, I don't want to get into, do you need to have access to hairdressers, and those, but I also want to bring back the point that we are saying, if this is any reasonable interpretation, this reasonable interpretation does include specific, types of locations. So if the CEO had left out any one or all of the types of locations in their definition, would we still accept it?
I don't think that's a fair question.
Why not?
It's not a fair question because that didn't happen. And in other words, it might still be, if he only left one other little thing out, it might still be meet any reasonable. Maybe if he left all of them out, maybe it wouldn't be any reasonable. But I don't know that it's fair to try to extrapolate something that isn't there to see. But I do hear what you're saying in terms of, you're very strongly saying that you don't feel that this is a reasonable interpretation. You would like to hear what the board has said. We have Simi who feels that it's reasonable. We have Mike who feels that it's reasonable. We have myself who feels it's reasonable. And, oh, thank you so much. Sorry about that. And I hope everybody heard that. And so I think that's where the standstill is that what we need to do is come to an agreement as a board and speak with one voice about this thing. Do we feel it's reasonable or not? And then move our conversation forward. So maybe the best thing to do is, we have two options. We can continue and go down the line and save this for the end when we vote. Or we can just take a quick temperature right now and see about this one. It's up to you all. I don't care. We don't have, there's no precedent for this, but we can all sort of just look around the table and say, do we want to continue this conversation and take a vote? Is this a reasonable interpretation right now?
I feel like I have made my point, and I'm not, I would just ask the board that as they are considering whether or not they think this interpretation is reasonable, to consider the fact that that this interpretation identifies specific types of locations, and that I feel I have identified a location that would belong fundamentally in this list, and that its omission, I think, is a reasonable or is a strong argument that it was an oversight not to include it, and that we should instruct staff that that was an oversight by noting that not a reasonable interpretation.
Yes, Rich.
So with this one, I think it did get the lowest score of reasonableness, right? So I mean, 50%, which means 4 out of the 8 that participated in this felt it was not. I'm kind of guessing that 2 of the folks that aren't here might have been 2 that said it wasn't. So frankly, I would be kind of curious to hear their opinion, but I don't know if we're gonna, because this ends report is really long, and I don't know if we're gonna get through that all today, or it's worthwhile to maybe table this one and get their input. I don't know. So I mean, the ends is pretty important, especially if we're going to 2025 with a goal of wanting to review, because I think we are in 2025, one of the things is to actually go through each of the ends.
Well, it should be is of interest to note that this did not go through committee first. It was not seen by the governance committee. It was not seen by the service committee. It was not seen by the finance committee. And hearing the passion that we are having about things that are here, I believe that our time would be better served to take it off the agenda for tonight and move it to committee so that we can have really good individual conversations, get things handled at your committee levels and get our heads wrapped around it, and then come back and have a better, heartier discussion when we come back in January, if everybody's amenable to that. We can certainly continue along this vein, but I feel like we're like a four-wheel drive in a big mud puddle and we're just not getting anywhere, you know? Would you be all right with that, Mr. Miller?
Well, no, I actually, I think, having made my point, like, I would like to kind of see this through to the end. And now I would think there's an argument if we feel like we don't, yeah, we have a quorum, but we don't have we're not comfortable making the vote with as many people missing as we are, that would be a reason. But I don't think the debate itself is the reason that I would want to give for not having this, for ending the discussion.
It's not just the debate on this, but we're only at 1.1, and it's quite a long report, and there were many questions and many responses from staff in red. And I think it's not that I don't want to see it through, Jesse, or that you haven't made some excellent points, but it's that if we are missing key people. And if we're going to continue to have these conversations on each point, I think that it might be better to take it back to committee and have really good, solid discussions at the committee level. I'm open to both interpretations. Would anyone like to make a motion that we table this conversation and send it back to committees? Or would someone like to just let me know that, no, you want to continue this conversation tonight? I'm open to whatever you want. Yes, Mike?
I will make a motion to table it and reconsider it committees.
Do we have a second? Seconded by Julie Grand. All those in favor, raise your hands. All those opposed? Noted. So we are going to send this back to committee, and I'd like everybody before their next committee meeting to have a really good hearty read of the new information. Matt, can we make sure that this new document is sent off to people who are not in attendance this evening? And then we'll see this back to our full board in January.
Absolutely. I'll make sure it's emailed to the full board.
Thank you, and that's why this works. It's not always easy, but it works. Okay. Next on our agenda is the reserve policy updates, and that's Ms. Dina Reed. Yes? Did I miss something?
Actually, I was intending to make the motion just having to do with this one point, because I think we could probably handle the other ones
That's what I was saying.
quicker.
I feel like I made my point
Yeah.
on this particular policy,
Yeah.
and that we should continue going through the rest of the policy.
That was the intent of my motion.
Okay, but the
And
board
I was only referring to this one policy.
but the board just voted to send everything to committee.
That,
So you're
I
asking
should
us
have,
to
no,
pull it?
I was not specific enough in my motion, because I thought that's what was being discussed. So I will withdraw my motion,
I don't know if we can do that.
and I would like to make a new motion.
Let me wrap my head around this just a minute. Think about what's happening here.
I would say Robert's rules say that anyone who is on the winning side of an election, of a vote, can bring it back for reconsidering. So I cannot bring it back because I lost. But this is what actually happened at Ypsilanti City Council in the matter of the.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, and within the same meeting, there were multiple votes because public comments were made after a vote, which changed the minds of some elected officials, and they made a motion to reconsider the issue.
So what I'm hearing is Mike would like to put a new motion on the floor that involves tabling 1.1 only and sending that to committee, but hearing the rest of the ends report and voting on the ends report. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is correct.
Mike has put the motion on the floor. It can be or cannot be seconded, whoever, it can go either way. Does anyone wish to second that motion?
I was actually going to modify it a little bit. Because I have a feeling there might be other ones that we're going to have quite deep discussions. And so I would actually prefer that we do discuss the entire ends report today, but we actually withhold voting until maybe we do bring the stuff to committee, and then at the January board meeting, hopefully we'll have more folks here. We can actually further discuss if needed, or at least vote at that time on what we want to do with the ends report.
Can I make a comment on that?
Yeah.
So Mike made a motion, the motion did not get seconded, so it failed, so we can take a new motion.
Oh. All right. I would like to make a motion that we table 1.1 and queue that one up to be discussed in committees, but we continue discussing this particular ends report, but withhold voting at the end on whether it's A, B, C, or D until after we have committee discussions at the January board meeting.
Does anybody want to second that?
Might give modification.
Okay, nobody seconded that, so that motion failed.
Okay.
We have the original motion. Yes, Matt?
If I might, as an off-ramp, in the past, the board has received the monitoring report, the ends report specifically, I believe last year, and the first month decided to simply review it for information and deferred any action until the following meeting, I think because it was a lot of discussion. And I do think it went through committees naturally at that point. So that's another opportunity. I don't know that it needs a motion necessarily from a strict parliamentary procedure, but I defer to the chair in terms of how you want to make that decision, but you certainly could just use this as an introductory, discuss all the items you want to whatever level of detail is sufficient for this evening, and then bring it back the following month.
If I may, because the reason why I suggested that, which I think Matt has always made it a lot more succinct to what I was trying to say, is because I think if we're going to pull 1.1 out to go to committee, I don't know how we can actually even vote on a monitoring report if we haven't made a decision about 1.1.
Yes, Mike?
I would just like to add the fact, and it influenced my intended motion. This is the only one on here that has 50-50. All the others are significantly minor in terms of the negatives here. I mean, we have 75%, we have another 75%, 88%, and another 88%. So this is by far the most controversial of them. That's why I singled that out compared with the others. But I'm just explaining why I said that, and I'm not sure that people understood that.
No, I mean, I agree. It's just I'm not sure what we would vote on, right? Because, I mean, is there an E? Or is it like we find the report reasonable except for 1.1, which we will then debate and then come back and then vote again as to what the next step is for 1.1 in regards to the CEO?
Well, I'm not sure that there's going to be a controversy like there is about this one. That's all my thought. And yes, I understand your point, Rich.
Yeah.
But we probably can't vote on the others, but maybe
Right.
we can kind of have an understanding that, or maybe we won't. I really don't know. But clearly, this is the one that's the most controversial.
Yes.
So what I'm hearing is a lot of confusion. I'm inclined to say, because all the motions have now gone away and failed, let us continue reviewing the monitoring report, say that we're done for 1.1, that's going to go to committee, continue to review the monitoring report and receive it as information, send it back to committee, not vote tonight at all on the ends report, and send it back to committees for more thorough review and come back and have a heartier discussion. But Mike, you certainly pointed out that there may not be any other grievous discussions coming forward. just as a note of time, and also for us to be able to be our best selves as we're discussing this. So we looked at 1.1. Thank you, everybody, for all of that. It's been a very interesting evening. If we take on the idea of only looking at policies that are not 100%, we had 1.1.3 that was at 75 and 75. Is there anyone who would like to discuss that policy at this time or have any questions for the CEO? Merry Christmas. Go ahead. No. No, of course, Jesse, you should.
So for this one, again, wanting to ask the board, in this case of whether any reasonable interpretation of riders and prospective riders perceive public transportation services as safe. I noted that physical safety was not covered at all, and that it was all a sense of mental, emotional safety. And so I wondered whether any reasonable interpretation could exclude any reasonable interpretation of safety could exclude physical safety. So to me, that seemed quite. I did not think that any reasonable interpretation of this policy, which speaks to safety rather broadly, could fail to address physical safety.
Can you share with me the specific, like ABCD, what page we should be looking at?
113, let's see. 41, thank you.
And was that rationale or measures and
That was
standards?
interpretation. That was the rationale for, well, I guess it was the interpretation. And then in terms of as we are deciding whether or not to accept a rationale, we need to, so he has provided a measurement or standard. I didn't disagree with that. But then there's the question of, is the measurement or is the rationale for that measurement or standard defensible? And so I guess I wanted to hear the defense of not including I didn't like that word, but that's using policy language. Is it defensible to exclude physical safety?
If I might, though, Jesse, under his operational definition, he says not only feeling safe, but from harassment, crime, and assault, which is physical. And I'm wondering why that's not enough.
None of the, okay, so maybe I should have put that on the evidence, because I don't think, it could be that I just didn't read that closely enough, in which case I will.
Not a problem. We can take our time on this. It's just. Matt, you had your hand up. Would you like to add anything while we're reviewing?
Yeah, a clarification to Jesse. There is physical issues in terms of assault on here in the definition, the rationale, and the evidence. I'm wondering if you mean non-security safety issues, slip fall, collisions, other
Yes.
more day-to-day, as
Yeah.
opposed to physical, you mean operational,
Yeah.
non-security.
Injuries sustained on.
Non-security.
Yeah, non-security
Okay,
issues.
thank you.
Would anyone like to continue the conversation that Jesse started? Do you have any thoughts on that? Did you have anything more to add, Jesse, or?
I just am wondering whether the lack of response from the board is that where that's coming from, like being unsure, disagreeing, being hesitant to prolong the discussion in general.
Well, for me, if I could answer real quick, I do know that we just saw treatment of the traveling public, and we did talk about slips and falls and things like that there. So I believe that all of that stuff is answered in another policy. Do you want to see that same data from those policies brought forward to this one? And do you feel that that would meet your need?
Well, no, because I'm talking about this policy. So I don't think evidence given in a monitoring report for the executive limitation, I wouldn't include that in ends monitoring report. I tend to view those as discrete things. So I guess my question, though poorly worded here, so does the board feel that the CEO not including physical injury, what was the term you used, like
Non-security.
yeah, non-security, from the definition of safe is like, they're like, yeah, okay, sure. Or in which case I would want, again, maybe, I personally think that was on our minds when we were talking about this policy, but if that was not clearly illustrated, then we can adjust that. This, to me, this is a question, do we need to adjust the policy to cover that? Or is it that the CEO overlooked other issues of safety because most of our conversations didn't have to do with that, but that was on our minds?
Mike?
Well, I could answer for myself, which is I thought that the interpretation was reasonable, but I also noticed there's only two people who voted otherwise, Jesse and some other person. And I mean, that's not an overwhelming statement that people think that way, even though,
I
and I haven't heard anybody step into that really tonight either. And there's of course, two people, as we said, are not here.
So you haven't been compelled by the blinding logic of my argument?
Jesse, I usually am, but not this time.
No, and I really am. I think this is an important question to ask. I think to me it is I would say, I go so far as to say a glaring omission, but I am also fully in agreement that one of the ways we can tackle that is by adjusting the policy. I just don't want to invest the time in rewriting the policy if the board says, no, yeah, the CEO should have included those issues. You do the work of coming back to it, and rather than making us rewrite the policy. So is it like, yeah, so that's my question.
Is there anyone on the board who feels like Jesse does and that this is an omission, or are we all happy with the rationale that was provided? I myself find it any reasonable interpretation. And again, the reason is our ends to me are what drive the executive limitations. The executive limitations are more drilled down combinations and extrapolations of a lot of what is in the ends. And again, I don't want to have too many policies that have the same, we've just been eliminating policies that are redundant. And I don't want to get to a point where we're being redundant in what we're asking the CEO to provide. And if we're already being provided that information in another policy, to me, again, this is in any reasonable interpretation, but I would love to hear if anyone has any other thoughts. Rich?
I'd like to propose that this becomes a topic discussion regarding the policy itself. Because I have a feeling there might be some PTSD around this particular policy coming to existence, but we knew it wasn't going to be completely perfect from the start, and maybe this is we bring it into service committee, we talk about it, and we decide whether it's something that does actually need to have a change and go from there. Because it could be that the committee says, you know what, in the end, I guess we're okay. But I think it's worth discussing one way or another.
And that's a very good point. It is a very new policy. It's only been in existence for just a month? 2 months? Not very long. This safety policy has not been in play for very long. And so this is sort of a beta test. So I hear what you're saying, and I'm wondering, I know that one of the comments in here from staff was that staff look forward to hearing the discussion to clarify all of these things. And so if the board, and so since we're already going to be talking about 1.1 polling places at committee level, perhaps 1.1.3 should also be discussed more heartily at the committee level, where you can have discussion and we can come back in January, again, because we're not voting on the policy itself tonight. Is that amenable to everyone? Okay. Yes, go ahead, Julie.
I would just say, if it is going back, I mean, I think again, this gets really into language choice, but maybe there's a difference between safety and security. And maybe safety is broader and security is more in line with the interpretation. I'm not sure about that, but based on what I'm reading, and I completely agree with you, Kathleen, I think all of that other safety data is captured in other policies. And so I don't want to see that redundancy, but if we like this piece under safety, but we feel like it's not capturing it, maybe it just needs to be changed to a different word to reflect what we actually want to see.
So we will send this back to, shall we send this back to both committees or only the service committee? What are your thoughts? Service committee is the one who wrote it. Mike, you're finance committee chair, so.
Well, I think it should be sent it back to all the committees, not just the service committee who did write it, yes. Because, I mean, we're talking about the whole board here.
Jesse?
Yeah, I think the distinction here is that we're still having the conversation about whether we find the interpretation reasonable. And after the board votes on that, then we can talk about referring it to policy or to committee for language changes. But we can't, I don't think it would be correct to refer policies to committee before we've voted on them.
I think the reason why we're sending these we should be sending the whole ends report actually to each committee, but I think it's important for us to note that these are the areas that we're having the conundrums with, so that when we're in our committee meetings, we could say, this is what we were focusing on at the board meeting. Perhaps these are the ones we should be focusing in on, not necessarily for policy rewrite, but to find out if we feel that these interpretations are reasonable and that the data is verifiable and all of that.
No, I still think that that's something that should be discussed by the entire board. If it's going to be referred to committee, then it should be referred to all committees so that everyone has a chance to weigh in. I wouldn't want the service committee to be the only one to have a discussion of this interpretation. You know, the finance committee gets to do that too.
Well, the ends report will be sent to all the committees, so let's have a good discussion at that level then, and we'll see how it rolls out. Sounds good. Should we only focus on, so we had 1.2.1, which was 88%. Was there any further concern about that? That seems like a really high bar.
If I might, I believe the person who made that comment is not here this evening.
Okay. There's 1.3.3, that was also at 88%. Yes, Mike?
I guess I would like to make some comments regarding that. Because Matt did more responses to this one than any others, I believe. And I'm not necessarily saying that it should be changed, but I just think it should be discussed a little bit. And I'm one of the ones who made comments here. And I think what interests me are three of Matt's comments. One has to do with the fact that the policy says use, but he has defined that is having accessible information, having access to information, and having available information. Secondly, he's saying it would be too costly if we really did want to get the use. And thirdly, he made the point that is that something that visitors to this area, is that really something that is important to the board? I think I'm quoting you correctly there. Is that, I think those are your words.
Mr. Carpenter?
Sure. So
So I'm just asking if you are, and then if I'm misinterpreting your comments.
no, you're doing
Okay.
very well.
Okay, so then I'd like to address them.
I might elaborate a little, if you're all right.
Okay?
It's interesting that this policy has been here since 2017, and I think this is, and we've reported it every year. This is the first time it's ever, I think, come under serious scrutiny. So I think that's interesting. The comments, from the board, I'll look at the first one on page 5 of the survey sheet. It isn't clear from this whether visitors are actually using the ride. I think that is a on-point comment. The policy reads, visitors use public transportation in the area, but my interpretation basically revolves around our services connect to intercity carriers, as Mr. Charneski was talking about earlier, and provide information and essentially facilitate it if visitors wish to use it. And then I go about providing evidence that those connection points exist. But I do not directly try to measure how many visitors are using it. That comment, I think, has shown up maybe in some other spot here as well. I think that is a valid comment. In writing the interpretations, I have some latitude to say, is this what you meant? And if you accept it, then that's the standard that I am held to, is that thing that you all accepted. So we've accepted this up to now. If that changes going forward, that's fine. It raises a couple of questions. First of all, I don't actually have a good way of measuring why someone is on the bus. We don't ask people, except every 2 years in an onboard survey, what is your trip purpose? To which they could respond, work, school, medical, shopping. And we ask them some questions about origin and destination. And by cross-referencing that, I could exclude commuters. I could exclude students, but are they visitors? I think what this policy was trying to get to was more the recreational side of visitors. But at this point, I'm starting to cut the data a lot. And the honest answer I would have for you is that I'm going to mix some people who are not really visitors into that. And there's just, we don't ask them. Could we change it? Yes. So we could do that, but then that's a survey that's done every 2 years. We don't really know why people are traveling on the bus. And it would be pretty invasive to try to ask and quite expensive. Is it possible? Yes. And if you direct me to do it, we'll figure out how to do it. But that raises a question of how much effort do you want me to put into what is, frankly, a relatively small group of people who, by definition, don't live in this area? How much effort do you want me to put into trying to grow this segment of the market, which could end up taking resources away from the other groups that you've identified? And this is where, and I just noticed this evening, there's a difference in the wording of the policies. This policy reads, visitors use public transportation in the area. Your other policies read like, people with economic challenges have affordable public transportation options. Public transportation facilitates labor mobility. You don't say commuters use public transit. So there's a wording difference here that I think affects the metric that I could use, and it is different here than it is for any of the other ones. If I were to go after this one, I certainly can, but then I'll have to come back and ask you, how much effort and resources should I put into a group for whom we do things, at what cost? By definition, this group doesn't live here. I have always interpreted your intent, and maybe that's me taking going a step too far, but this wasn't the highest priority. If that is incorrect, I would appreciate knowing it. But I think that sort of gets into it. Is it difficult to measure? Yes, it's actually really hard because we don't invade people's privacy when they're on the bus to ask them, where are you from? We don't do that. Can I overcome that? Probably at some cost and at some time. The bigger question is, do we really want to go down that road? Do you want me to spend lots of time and energy on a relatively small group of people who don't live here? I look forward to your clarification.
Yeah, Matt, I interpreted your comments here really exactly as you expressed them. And as a matter of fact, I do remember 2 years ago, you were making similar points. I do. This is not the first time. I think that's fine that you make these points, and this is the first time I've seen them in writing, though. So let me address them, and I'll do it in reverse order. The most fundamental is, are visitors important to the ride? And if they're not, I don't think we should have this policy at all, frankly. That it would just be a waste of our time if it's not important to us. I feel otherwise, and I have the advantage or something that prejudices me that I used to be on the Destination Ann Arbor board, as you're aware. Visitors, I know because Destination Ann Arbor has done actually quite a few surveys in different ways. Visitors are important to the people of Ann Arbor, and I can't quote you the numbers, but they've done surveys regarding that. There's people who don't like visitors, but a very strong majority think Ann Arbor is in the Ann Arbor area really is a better place because we attract visitors. And I know the cities very much feel that way. It helps the economy, and it helps the businesses, it helps the restaurants, it helps the shops. So, that's my feeling about that. So, but now, and of course, I'm the one who made this comment here, the fact that the policy actually says use, and you interpret use as really having the information there that they could access if they knew how to access it. I don't think we do much of a job of really putting information out in front of the visitors, but that's just another matter. And I certainly very much appreciate and understand and think it's very persuasive, the cost, how you would go about doing this. And I'm very willing to accept that. But I just think we either should say we are talking about use or just the ability to use. And if we really want use, that's the way it should be interpreted, in my opinion. And you do a good job of pointing out that that's not the way we look at some of these other policies. And I think that's, to me, it would be an acceptable way to have that policy, but I don't like the interpretation that way.
Yes, Rich?
I actually am going to suggest that we have this particular policy also be part of the policy review for the reason around use, but also as I'm looking at this, I really start to wonder, like, what do we define as visitors? I mean, is it non-workers? Because it sounds like we're defining this as non-commuting, because in reality, if someone's coming to our region and they're using our service and they stop at a park and ride, they're a visitor, right? And the CEO's definition is non-residents to learn about the existence. So in reality, he is meaning this, in my view, from a definition of if we consider a visitor to also include workers, they are coming into our area using our bus services to get to their jobs. So he is meaning that, I guess, that particular parameter of measurement. And so I think we probably need to discuss a little bit more about this policy in general.
So when you're in your committee meetings and you're talking about ends, again, you can say whether or not, I would like people to come back in January
Yeah.
and say, these are the areas of policies that we've identified that we would like to have discussion on, and then entertain those discussions at the board meeting and decide whether or not to handle them that night or send them to committee. But I'm keeping a list of policies that we are particularly concerned about, so that when we are going through our committee meetings, we can focus a little bit more in on those. But I'm also not, I want to stress that we should not be coming up with the answers of how do we want to answer those policy questions, because really that is a full board decision and should take place once we've actually accepted the report and had a discussion on the report.
I would like to add one more comment,
Yes.
if I could. You notice the way there's 100% on interpretation. I voted it was a reasonable interpretation. But I wanted to make a comment, and you see that I have comments. One talks about the how versus it being able to do it. And second, I said it was even, looking at it even with using that interpretation, it's kind of borderline, but I still voted it was reasonable. I just wanted to have this out there. I wasn't really intending to try to overthrow or rewrite or anything like that, but I just thought that should be something that Matt and maybe other people too would take note of. But I wasn't really trying to change anything. And I don't know if that changes anything now. But now you're kind of getting me more on the record that I intended to be. Maybe I'll say in my opinion, but this isn't necessarily what we should do. We should perhaps rewrite it and take out the word use.
And that's something we can talk about you can talk about in your committees, but really it should come to the full board in January once we sit and talk about the monitoring report. We've been having some really good discussions, and I know that we're having some growing pains here, but I'm really proud of us for getting through this. The last one that just didn't have 100% was policy 1.3.4, although it was at 88%, and I don't know that there's any discussion, but just in case there is, I want to throw it out there. Does anybody want to throw anything out there for that policy? 1.3.4.
Oh my God.
All right, then. So we've had a lot of good conversations this evening. I think we made the CEO's head spin just a little bit, and our own as well, but I think we did a really good job. We've brought up some really good points and some really good things for us to think about as we come back to committee to talk about the ends report and how it was presented. And I really look forward to January when we all come back together to discuss this report more thoroughly. Are there any
I
other?
want to make a closing comment, I promise. I think the ends report is the most important because it really drives everything, as I think you kind of said before, Kathleen. And so I think even though we spent a lot of time here, and maybe I think the ends deserve that. And at some point, I know we are intending to actually look at the policies themselves and the ends policies. And I think this is a lot of food for thought for doing that.
No, that's a very good point, Mike. In 2025,
Yeah.
we are slated to actually look at the entirety of the ends report. That has been on our docket for a while, so that's a really good point, Mike. Thank you for reminding us. Are there any other discussions on this topic right now? All right, seeing none, thank you everyone for your engagement. I appreciate it. And we're going to move on to Ms. Dina Reed now. Dina, thank you for your patience. We're going to talk about the reserve policy, policy 2.4.6.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here for you guys, so we're good. After months of discussion, internal discussion, which I believe was mentioned a couple of different times during the budgeting process for fiscal year 2025, staff has been revisiting the operating reserve target for the agency in light of the growing budget, the amount of money that we would need to keep in operating reserve to meet the 2.5 months of cash on hand or operating reserve has proven to be a little bit more on the excessive side in our opinion, and as such we have made a reserve target adjustment down to 2.0 months. The information in your packet, starting on page 68, presents the background of the operating reserve and the rationale for this. I also want to share that this information was shared and reviewed in detail at the Finance Committee meeting on December 6th. And with the results of how that went, we just decided to continue to move forward with sharing it with the full board. I want to point out that policy 2.4.6 requires that staff keep adequate reserves. And since you'll be monitoring that policy and we're focused on maintaining compliance with board policies, we want to share the basic rationale for why we've made this adjustment. So there's more background in your packet, but I'm going to hit the key points. In the past, the agency has had a very different financial level of stability than the agency has today. Because we've gone through several years of building reserves, we have three primary reserves. We have the operating reserve, we have the insurance reserve, which is smaller, and we have the capital reserve, which is significant. Because of building up the reserves and having passed a millage for the next 5 years, securing adequate funding for operations, we feel that we not only have adequate reserves, but if we were to continue to keep the reserve target at 2.5, we might be kind of heading towards keeping an excessive or a greater amount of cash than we need to maintain liquidity and a cushion against unexpected events. So the point of the operating reserve, as a reminder, is to be able to have money in reserve in case there are unexpected levels of cash flow so that we can continue our mission of operations without interruption. Given our current financial stability over the next few years, the new millage that is effectively come into place in 2024 and will be there for the next 5 years, as well as the additional reserves that we've built, we feel very comfortable changing that reserve to 2.0 and keeping our current reserve balance at $12.9 million. If you look also in your packet on page 70 and 71, I've shared, we've included a few figures kind of demonstrating the amount of cash that we have and sharing what this will look like in the future. So it's not just that we're making this decision for 1 year. We're collectively looking at our projections over the next few years, looking at our revenue and expense projections, and very comfortable that we can maintain over at 2.0 or over 2.0 for the projection period. So I just want to draw your attention to figure 2 on the bottom of page 70. It shows our projected cash balances through fiscal year 2029, which is the final year of when we'll use the millage money. You can see that we expect to have adequate capital reserve, operating reserve, and cash for operations through the projection period. And then again in figure 3 on page 71, we're showing the impact of where we've been and where we expect to go with the reserve target and the levels that we've been maintaining over the past few years and the levels that we expect to maintain over the future. You can see we've never dropped below the reserve target. We've never needed to dip into any reserves, and that's even when times were a little bit tougher for us financially, when we actually did have a structural deficit at one point years ago. So given all of this information, staff has made that adjustment and just wanted to inform the board of the background and rationale and hear any comments or thoughts or concerns that the board may have regarding that decision. That concludes my initial comments, but I'm happy to answer any questions that the board has.
Thank you, Dina. Are there any questions? Mike, would you like to maybe add anything? Because I know that it went to the Finance Committee and you've had some really good discussions with Dina yourself.
Yes, I would. Thank you. As Dina correctly pointed out, the board does not have to approve a level of reserves. The policy is adequate reserves. And we've had the policy of 2.5 months for a very long time. And I thought it was important, first of all, because the 2.5 month reserve has really been a bedrock of our financial strength. We put it into place, and we've focused on that every quarter as being one of the most important measurements of our financial strength. And now it's changing. And I think this briefing document did a very good job of showing why it's changing. And I think it was also very important to provide the history, because we have really changed a whole lot in many ways. And I'm just concentrating on the financial strength of this organization. It was not in the greatest shape when Matt came on board 9+ years ago. Just coincidentally, it was the same day I think I came on board. But things have changed greatly. There's a much greater strength in the organization people-wise, and much greater strength in the organization financially. It's very important, it's very important to continue that financial strength, but this document shows why we don't need to keep it at the 2.5 months anymore. And it shows why, but it's really important also, I think, for the board members who haven't been on board as long as I have, or even some of the other more senior people, to know some of that history, because that history is important regarding where we are today. So I think it's great that they made this change. I fully support it, but I think it's also really good and important that it was explained to the board, the background for it and why it's changing.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Do we have any questions for Ms. Reed from the board? Rich, go ahead.
So I'm assuming that half a month operating revenue would then go to something else? Did I miss that? Or, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out like what good comes out of that.
That's a great question. Thank you. Yes. So right now we have an operating reserve of 12.9 million. As shown in figure 3, if we lower the operating reserve target to 2.0 and we leave that 12.9 million in there right as it is, we will, as of September of 2024, so just currently, have an operating reserve, 2.3 months of operating reserve. We've always been just slightly above the 2.5 target, and with the 12.9 million we have in there now, we'd be slightly above the 2.0. We may leave the 12.9 million in the reserve and kind of let it ride, so that we'll maintain just slightly above that operating reserve, a reserve target. If you look further out, as the budget grows over the next few years, and it will through inflationary needs, as it grows, we would not have to contribute anything more into the capital reserve over the next several years to maintain 2.0. So that's one approach. Another approach, so what it does alleviate is us having to put extra money in there to get to the 2.5. So that money is being repurposed in the budget and will be used for operating needs, initiatives, and things like that in the budget. We also could use some of the 12.9 million for the next couple of years for other things. We would then have to fund additional monies throughout the, like later in the year. So we're still looking at whether or not we want to spend that amount of money. Is 1.4 million, by the way. So we're still looking at that to determine if it's worthwhile to actually take the money and do something with it, or to kind of keep it in there and just maintain just a little bit above that target and allow the budget to kind of catch up with where that's at.
Okay, that's super helpful. I mean, maybe we could use some of that money to run some surveys.
The board, staff will consider that.
Mike?
I'm going to try to answer that question. I don't at all disagree with what Nina just said, but I'll try to say it. What I would see it as maybe simpler terms. That extra money that's available because it's not going into the operating reserve will be used wherever it's can be used the best. Is that a good, simple explanation?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
May I ask a question? Of course I can. When you decide to move that money out, if you should decide to move that money out and not let it ride, will that be something that the board will be notified of, or is this considered the notification now?
What would happen is, as the budget grows, we would use the money. So we may add something into the budget that would require more funding than the revenue we're collecting, say, next year. And then we would use more of that cash, and that fund would come out of the operating reserve. So the budget would be the mechanism in which you'll know how much we're spending and where any monies are coming from.
Yes, Mike?
Could I answer that another way too?
Yeah.
I think we'll see it quarterly when we see
Oh,
the
yeah.
quarterly financials.
Yeah, quarterly financial reports always show how we're comparing in the operating reserve target. And technically this is all in our fund balance. So it's unrestricted cash in our fund balance. So again, it's just about how much expense we have compared to revenues that are coming in, whether or not that uses some of the operating reserve or not. But yes, we'd be transparent in our operating reports.
Very good. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close that out. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
We're going to move on to Mr. Hess, to the long-range plan refresher and updates. I should clarify that because we so you can keep coming, Raymond, sorry. I just wanted to qualify that because we're moving the ends discussion to January, the policy discussion would then take place in January. So we're going to move that. Good question.
All right, very good. Madam Chair, Board of Directors, thank you for the opportunity tonight. First, Forrest Yang sends his regrets, as Mr. Carpenter said, he's feeling a little under the weather. To my knowledge, I was not the one who made him sick from last month. You may recall I was under the weather. I don't think I am to blame. So tonight's presentation is really meant to kind of give a refresher of the long-range plan. Many of you were on the board when that was approved, but maybe even more importantly than that is to really talk about some of the progress that's being made on its implementation. So I'll highlight some of those facts as well. So as a reminder, this body approved the long-range plan in July of 2022, which was subsequently followed up very shortly thereafter in August of 2022 with the five-year implementation plan that was made possible by the millage that the voters of the region approved. So thank you to the voters to allow some of this work to advance. This plan, known as TheRide 2045, lays out a vision and strategy for transit in the Ann Arbor-Ypsilanti region for the next 20 years. And it guides development of our ongoing and future projects. Oops. The outcomes of the plan really reflect kind of our shared values. We want to make sure that we have levels of service on average that increase, that pretty much double. But more importantly than increasing that amount of service is making sure that we're serving those who are currently underserved. So it increases access to opportunities by 123% for those who are perhaps less fortunate. We also want to make transit more reliable and faster. So the plan really anticipates a 39% increase in kind of the reliability and how fast and reliable transit is. And it helps increase ridership significantly. As we attract more people to transit, that gets people out of their vehicles. And so we would expect that we would reduce 7 million car trips per year and reduce greenhouse gases by 7 to 11% at a community-wide level. That's not agency level, that's across the community as a whole as people transition sort of their modes of transportation. And through all of this, we want to continue to make sure that transit is accessible to everybody in the community. Translating those values into benefits of the plan and how they affect people specifically, we want seniors, people with disabilities, minorities, low-income groups, and anyone else with more limited access to private automobiles to have better access to jobs, education, shopping, social services, and housing. As was mentioned, we want to give people transportation options and allow them to be less dependent on single occupancy motor vehicles. And all of this will kind of shift communities to more walkable, vibrant, and healthy communities as a whole. So there's kind of this spillover benefit. There's sort of this positive cycle that transpires the more people that ride buses. But this plan wasn't developed in isolation. Again, I'm sure you all recall what was happening in 2020 and 2021. It was difficult to reach out to the community during COVID, but staff did a tremendous job. It was an 18-month planning process. There were 3 rounds of community engagement. There were just under 4,500 touch points that we heard from the community. Again, that's significant given what was going on. You know, we had to rethink how we reached out, allowed a lot of online opportunities and different ways of people to communicate with us. There was also a public advisory committee that helped really steer the direction of the plan and help inform some of the recommendations that came out of it. And what we heard was a strong desire for transformational change. And what's probably one of the most reassuring things that came out of that engagement is as we continued to refine the plan, as we listened to people, at the end, when we took the final draft out to the public, it was overwhelmingly supported by those who commented. 80% of responses supported the draft plan and what was included therein. And so boiling the plan down into a simple graphic, this is one that I have on my computer screen daily. This is the meat and potatoes, or the tofu and quinoa, depending upon what your dietary restrictions are of the plan. It really is like layers of an onion. Sorry, I use food analogies a lot. The red lines kind of are the backbone of the system. They are our bus rapid transit. This is high capacity, high frequency networks. From that, that's the spine of which everything else radiates. Those are the lines in red. The dark blue lines are those key service corridors on high demand routes. So really trying to enhance service and connections to those spaces as well, building off of those red lines. Next, you have the express route on the freeway that connects City of Ann Arbor to City of Ypsi and places in between. Fast, reliable, quick transportation between kind of our key downtown areas. That's the dashed blue line on the map. Then we complement all of that with the light blue lines, which are the high frequency network. So this is a lot of our, existing fixed routes, but providing better, more frequent service so that it can become reliable and people can just hop on when they need to hop on. And anything that's not covered on the map is complemented with our existing fixed route, with other services, FlexRide, A-Ride, and some of those other complementary wraparound services as well. All of this is meant to make transit faster, more frequent, reliable, convenient, and accessible, and make the ride a more attractive and efficient system overall. But these things can't be done without additional supporting infrastructure. We know that there are enhancements that need to be made to our garage. We're currently at capacity. I'm pleased to report that the request for proposals just closed. We had a lot of interest in that, and so staff is currently evaluating those proposals now, and we expect an award to a consultant to help us select a new garage and go through the process to do that starting in the new year. We also know we need a new transit center in Ypsilanti. We've been giving you regular updates on that process, and that's coming along nicely through our environmental clearance. We just submitted last week the latest draft to the FTA, and so fingers crossed we'll get a positive read from them on the direction that that's headed. We're also working with other partner agencies, such as the Housing Commission, on what can be done around the Blake, especially with the new housing development that's planned just south of us, what is commonly referred to as the Y lot. We also know we need to have other kind of complementary infrastructure, more buses, better rider experience. You can see here kiosks. And so all of those are things that we can do to help enhance the rider experience and attract more people to the system. We also know that people live regional lives, that beyond our service area, there is demand for transit, there is demand for transportation, but some of that is beyond our control. So we know we need to collaborate with other regional partners, such as the RTA. We want to build off the success of the D2A2 and the TheRide and see if we can find partners to kind of fill those gaps and bring in people from outside of our service area. Some of that is obviously beyond our control, and we need to work in those partnerships, find new funding mechanisms, find different ways to provide that service. But it is kind of key for our success. And I'm also pleased to report that we are currently working on a scope for a park and ride study. It'll be a technical analysis just to kind of do a scan of the feasibility of where there might be the highest demand. But we're currently working with a consultant to kind of think through what that could look like. Now, as much as we'd like to snap our fingers and make this all happen in one fell swoop, we know that's not reasonable. So the plan is digested into kind of bite-sized chunks through different kind of time periods. So most immediate we have right now in the short term are those service improvements. And I'll talk about those in more detail here in just a second. But obviously, that's kind of the easiest thing within our control that doesn't require a lot of infrastructure. A lot of that was implemented earlier this year, and I'll give you some details in terms of how well that's playing out. Moving on to stage 2, we want to look to make significant increases in service, expand our fleet, look to the new garage and see if we can get that first bus rapid transit line implemented, hopefully on Washtenaw Avenue. Then the next phase would be to look at the next spine for bus rapid transit, the north-south route, that might be State Street and or Plymouth, and look at other priority and express routes within the system. And then that last phase from roughly 2039 to 2045 is looking at the high frequency network across the entire system, and again, kind of completing what was identified in that map that I showed you earlier. So talking about this first stage of implementation and some of the progress that's been made, and forgive me, I'm just going to read verbatim off my notes so I get the facts right. Ridership along Washtenaw from April to November, which is combining the Route 104 and the 4, increased ridership by 19% from the same period from the previous year. So that tells us that the introduction of the 104 has actually attracted new riders to the system, which is very exciting. Additionally, the service expansion that was implemented in August is showing weekend ridership increasing by 40% between September and November of this year, which is the highest weekend ridership ever recorded in our history. So again, we provided more service and our riders responded. They're using that service. System-wide ridership from September to November also reached highest levels since the pandemic and is about a 17% increase from last year. So again, these are all very exciting movements. We're seeing that the introduction of this new service is attracting people to our system. And what's also really important on this point is that this is what we heard from the public. Improving off-peak service, including weekend and late evening service, was one of the most popular requests during our public engagement. It's often difficult to boil down a complex plan that's a couple hundred pages long into a simple infographic, but here's our attempt, right? So there are kind of 5 steps. You'll see that our end game is really to grow ridership. Really, that's what this is all about. Ridership is our bread and butter. But in order to do that, we need to establish this critical path of implementing BRT, bus rapid transit, the high frequency network, expand our fleet, expand our capabilities and our facilities, and expand terminals and garages. And then continue to improve service and the quality and reliability of that service. I will note the next 2 slides, I mean, all of them come with a bit of a caveat and a footnote, but the next 2 probably have the biggest footnotes and caveats. The timeline is somewhat malleable, as is the budget. Some of these things can be out of our control. Opportunities may present themselves sooner than we anticipated, or there may be setbacks because we didn't foresee certain things. But generally speaking, this is kind of the Gantt chart that we use as our guiding principle. Again, you've heard us give updates on the Ypsilanti Transit Center. That project is moving along nicely. The Blake Transit Center is on a similar path related to the housing project. And I just mentioned the bus facility and garage is also kicked off as well. We are also planning to start our bus rapid transit evaluation process sometime next year. We don't know exactly what that looks like yet. Obviously, we want to engage our partner, especially if we're talking about Washtenaw Avenue. That would be Michigan Department of Transportation, about what's within the realm of possibility before we start working on that scope. But that is one of the things I'll be working on in the start of the new year. All of this is, of course, subject to funding, and there's a lot of uncertainty around what the funding forecast looks like. So, Dina, Matt, the executive team are watching that space very closely. We may have to kind of shift around a little bit and pivot, but we want to continue to move these initiatives along. So speaking of budget, this is a high-level review of the financial plan. We want to be careful not to overcommit or underinvest. We want to try to find that sweet spot to really make the plan move in the positive direction without getting out over our skis while also not underperforming as well. Operating costs, as I'm sure you're well aware, are typically funded through local property tax, state operating assistance, and passenger fares. But over time, we might want to see if there are other opportunities to sort of diversify our portfolio and become a little bit less reliant on local property taxes because of how frequently we have to go back to the voters. It's just something to think about, something that we'll continue to keep an eye on, see if there are other opportunities that present themselves. Similarly, on the capital costs, this board, the leadership of TheRide, established that capital reserve, which is great. But we want to use that money, we want to stretch it out as far as we possibly can. We want to leverage it for other federal funds. We want to use as many of our other funds as we can to, again, do as many of these projects that I just described. So looking at state, local, regional, federal funds to bring into the fold as well to implement those projects. And then in closing, the long-range plan we anticipate will transform transit in the Ann Arbor-Ypsi area. It's an ambitious vision that requires partnerships, additional investments, and leadership by the people in this room in particular, but also with support from the community. And ultimately, we strive to improve social equity, environment, and support a strong economy that grows ridership. One other little off-script comment I'll note is I've gotten very clear direction in my first 6 months here at TheRide that Matt and Forrest see TheRide 2045, our long-range plan, as really a work plan. It's not an aspirational pipe dream. It's literally the things that we have lists of projects that we want to implement. A lot of the difficult decisions were made on the front end in the plan development to make it realistic. And so it really is sort of a blueprint. It is a roadmap for how we're going to really do the work ahead of us. And so we take the plan very seriously. Like I said, it's open on my desktop every day. I reference it daily. And so it's a very ambitious plan, but it's also, in theory, very achievable as well. And we think it will lead to a better future for all of our communities. And so with that, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. Do we have any questions for our speaker tonight on the board? Oh, hey, Mike.
Thank you, Raymond. This was a very good, nice, concise summary of our long-range plan. People worked so much on, and the board got involved in for a long period of time, too. Because this is a long-range plan, and we're only shortly into that period where we, subsequent to our finishing, I presume these numbers are all the same that we saw before. There's nothing that's been updated, is that right?
My understanding is that's correct, that a lot of those long-term, they're very they're very high-level planning level estimates. I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the plan development, some were sort of adjusted for inflation in the out years. But yeah, things may change if, costs go up significantly, inflation.
But it's certainly early into that, and I think it's really great that you're briefing us and that as I understand, we will get ongoing updates including what things will change and what's changed and why and so forth.
Indeed.
So get a little bit of a soapbox here. I have seen so many organizations, they have to do a long-range plan. I mean, that's mandatory. All profit or nonprofit organization have to do it. And they do it, and then they kind of forget about it. And it's really good to see that TheRide is not going to be forgetting about it. We're going to get fairly frequent updates on how things are going, and nobody is going to forget about it. And that's terrific. Thank you.
I can attest this plan does not sit on a shelf and collect dust. It's being used.
Thank you, Mike, for pointing that out. Do we have any other questions or comments from the board? Mike. Jesse.
Can you put the long-range plan in the context of the regional TIP? Of thinking at the later on in the CEO report, we're talking about how or maybe this was an email, I can't remember. We talked about how we obligate funds. There's this whole process that needs to go into getting it included with the TIP, and I was wondering, well, we have a plan. We've had this plan for years. Can't we just send our long range plan off to MDOT or whoever and just say, there you go. We'll let you know if anything changes.
Well, yeah, I think there are a couple different things to keep in mind. So there are regional transit plans. So for example, the RTA has a regional transit plan, and our plan kind of feeds into that plan. SEMCOG has a regional plan. WATTS, SEMCOG is the Metropolitan Planning Organization for Detroit. We have a sort of baby MPO here in Washtenaw County called WATTS. Our plan is meant to be reflected in all of those long-range plans. Some of those are federally required documents, and so there has to be some synergy between them. However, when we talk about things like the Transportation Improvement Program, that's a federally required document that must be developed to show how federal funds are being programmed. So a plan, as we know, there is not a dollar for every project in here. When we get that dollar, we then need to go to WATTS and SEMCOG and say, hey, we now have federal money for this project. The YTC is a good example. You need to put that into the program so then the feds can obligate that funding, right? Because of the appropriations and all of that happen. you need to kind of whittle that project down and kind of secure that federal funding for the specific project. So it is a fairly bureaucratic process, but it is a sort of necessary evil, working through those processes. But it's also showing some transparency about how federal funds are being used. The feds, this is our document, the TIP and the STIP kind of are a reflection of how that federal funding is going to be used. So in theory, there's definitely synergy, but there are different processes that kind of dictate each of those documents.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Next, we'll move on to operational updates. We're going to receive the quarterly forest service report from Mr. Brooks. All right. Do you want to use this or do you just want to use the arrows? Okay.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to give you the Q4 service report. Yeah.
One moment. Pardon?
It wasn't me.
There it is.
All good?
Back to our regularly scheduled programming.
Okay, so we're going to start correlation on page 90. Is 90 there? Yep, there it is. Okay. Very good quarter. We had a lot of very positive things that have worked out. We had some challenges that we're still working on, but overall, we had a very strong quarter. As Raymond mentioned, our ridership has greatly increased. Quarter over quarter, our ridership has gone up 200,000 riders. Our complaints have drastically lowered. Per 100,000 boardings, we're down 37% in customer complaints. We did have a rise in preventable accidents in direct correlation to the amount of new operators we have. Over the last 6 months, due to turnover and the need for new operators, we have 42 new operators working for the authority. Moving on to the next page, you're looking at our fixed route ridership. As I mentioned earlier, the top graph gives the indication Q3 compared to Q4. We are up 200,000 boardings. As we increased in the amount of boardings, the cost of boarding has come down. Right now, it's costing $10.63 per boarding. Moving on to page 92, you're looking at the MV TheRide paratransit. We had 100 additional trips quarter over quarter. The TheRide ridership is up and steadily going up. And again, the cost of boarding is going down. This has been a challenging quarter with taking over from GoldRide by Via. Via had some serious challenges as they came in. I think the challenge was they really didn't understand our business. Now that through working with Robert and Via, they're really responding to our needs. They're really coming around. So I'm happy to say I think we're trending in a good way. One of the biggest challenges we want to get really under control is the overnight trip denials. We know that's an issue that we're working through. If you move on to page 93, as I have up there, the next item on page 93 is the report on the van pool rides. Hasn't been a large increase, but it's been steadily moving up. On page 94, there's more information to share with you regarding the rollover from Golden into Via. As you can see in the fourth measure, or what do you call it? The fourth line, we have our overall denials had substantially increased, almost 200 denials increase, which is very unacceptable. I am very happy to say the next quarter is going to show a drastic decrease. Our boardings are up, and our late night denials are drastically up. As you can see, we went from 41 to 244. But we've beefed up the amount of people that are working overnight now, and we think we've got this under control, and you should see a drastic improvement quarter over quarter. I'm not sure how much longer we're going to keep this metric in as far as reporting the D2A2 ridership, but as you can see, it's still trending in the upward mobility. Very happy to report we had two major detours over the last couple quarters that were really negatively affecting our on-time performance. But even with the detours that we had, we still averaged 80% on-time performance on our fixed route bus routes. So I think you're going to see in the next quarter that we're really starting to trend even better than the anticipated 80%. And that's all I have to report. Does anybody have any questions?
Open it up to the board for questions. Rich, and then Jesse.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I don't know if I missed this, but there's a stat in here that says complaints per 100,000 boardings is down 37%, which is great, but I'm trying to remember, do we know why it was so high in Q4 '23?
I'm really not sure exactly. I think we've done a really good job of just looking at everything we do and taking the approach of continuous improvement, whether it's on-time performance, being responsive to our customer complaints. Like, we really take the time to respond to them and find out what is negatively affecting them. The other thing that we've done, we've become much better at identifying problems quickly rather than waiting till the end of the quarter to respond. You know, we have very detailed turnovers after each shift that allow us to respond much quicker. So I think as an organization, we have become much better and much quicker to respond to customers' needs rather than waiting to later to respond.
Jesse.
I wanted to make a comment for the board's benefit with the overnight rejections, the increase of 200, like from 44 to 241 over the course of a quarter, since that correlates directly with the transition from our previous provider to our current provider. I think we found that to be a pretty strong indication that was not less that our new provider is rejecting people at a 500% rate higher, but more that let's call it a discrepancy in how denials were being tracked between the two providers.
Interesting.
So we haven't, just to kind of clarify, we have no indication that there actually is that many more people being denied.
I think it's a combination thereof, and I think you're right on point there. I think one thing VIA has been really good at is being very honest to where we started. And from being, identifying where we were, I think you're going to see the results not only improve, but be much more accurate. So I think you're right on point there, Jesse.
Mike?
A couple of questions, George. You mentioned regarding the big drop in on-time performance due to detours. I presume that's all the construction going on around, is that right?
Yeah, we really struggled in the summertime with not only detours, but the detours changing midday. Like, we didn't have a lot of, we didn't know in a lot of advance, so we had to respond rather quickly. It was really challenging this past summer, but because there was so many projects running simultaneously that were changing daily. I think what we did really well is we developed a detour committee that was working with the detours every day and then keeping operations abreast at how we were going to adjust during each indication of change.
Now, I can sure imagine it's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, I
Well, it's
know.
for everybody, walking, biking, driving,
Yeah.
taking the bus, no matter what. It's always seemed to be, the wrong road was closed and stuff like that, yeah.
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 Back to your fixed ridership chart, and you pointed out, which is nice to see, the increase between the third and the fourth quarters. And Raymond pointed out some specific things that had to do with the new services that were implemented, and that's all terrific. And, but in the reality there, if you look at the numbers, we're still only at 80% of what it was pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
And Raymond also pointed out that the ultimate goal of the long-range plan is ridership. How are you looking at the next year, let's say?
It's tough to predict, but the one thing I'm very excited to report, I think we're doing all the things that could bring riders in. And that's making sure our buses are on time, making sure our buses are clean, making sure we have proper information posted on our website. I think we're doing all the little things that'll make it comfortable to ride our system and then have a good customer experience. I think another thing that has really helped is getting the whole staff to go out and ride the system quarterly, seeing what's working, seeing what's not, and then responding with remedial action that positively affects our customers. I think that has really, even from checking the plants at the YTC and the BTC, are they put in the ground right? Are the cigarette butts cleaned up right? Are we emptying the trash cans on time? All those things add up to a better quality customer experience, and I think you're starting to see the results.
I've seen lots of articles, like in the New York Times, about major cities and major corporations insisting that employees go back to working in the office and not remotely, and it's being resisted and so forth. How about our region, Ann Arbor in particular, where most of the jobs seem to be? Are companies that had more employees downtown and now have fewer, are some of those coming back?
I'd be faking if I told you I knew the actual data, but I can tell you one thing. Our buses are full, and when we're leaving at the end of the day, it's much tougher to get on Route 94 and Route 23. There's something going on where there's more people in Ann Arbor coming in the morning and leaving in the afternoon.
Of course, that's 94 and 23. You're talking about, not in our bus, except maybe park and ride.
Yeah. One of the things we started reporting on is how many buses are we experiencing that are completely full? And when we find that out, our operators are reporting it to dispatch, and then we're recording it so we can keep an eye on where are we at our limit, and then strategically setting up buses to respond to overburdened routes.
Do you have any statistics about office occupancy downtown?
I personally
Obviously,
do not.
That's a correlation to.
Yeah. Matt?
I think Matt has a response.
Yeah, if I might, we do watch that. I think the planning group in particular, I know Forrest and I keep an eye on the office vacancy rate. It is still high in Ann Arbor. And yes, over the last 18 months, we've watched the ping pong ball of back to the office. Oh, not yet. Back to the office. I really mean it this time. Oh, maybe I don't. And it kind of going back and forth. I don't know, frankly, where that one's going to land. And I think it may be different in every community. Ann Arbor may be different than DC. DC is a real, like a company town, if you will, with one big employer. That one employer could issue a fiat and everyone's coming back to work. And there's some rumor that that may happen.
Or everybody could get fired, too, yes.
Or, which would probably depress WMATA's ridership, but that's Randy's problem, not mine. Here in Ann Arbor, we don't have, we do have one big employer, but U of M's already had everyone back for some time. So that's already there. Students are already back. What we're seeing is the office vacancy rate primarily in downtown Ann Arbor. Although we watch downtown Ypsilanti and it's not as strong as it was pre-pandemic either. It is an open question about what will bring those types of activities back downtown. We've had some good conversations with the DDA where they've been measuring through their circulation study the activities in downtown, and to oversimplify it, particularly along Main Street, it's kind of shifting from a business district to an entertainment district. Like Vogel's, Locksmith, not there. A lot of these sort of core downtown businesses are not there. A lot of the technology company, I don't know what Duo is doing these days, but I remember pre-pandemic going through some of the software companies down there. Those are maybe the easiest ones to send people to work from home. I think it's still an open question whether small employers of that scale, what they're going to do exactly. So that is probably the missing 20% in some respects of our ridership, were those regular commuters. And that's some of your earlier questions. Like the planning group, George works on customer satisfaction and retention. Everything he talked about there, from cigarette butts on up, customer retention. As soon as they get on the bus, if they like it, they'll come back. Planning works on customer attraction, all the things we need to do to grow. Jeff's group is working on sales and advertising, if you will. And we have plans developing in all of these spaces to begin to get back. But fundamentally, the market demand did shift. We're seeing some things like they're tearing down Sears. They're putting up an apartment building. Caddy Corner north of that, Oxford has some big plans for South Ann Arbor University. As that intensification happens, we're very much talking to all of those groups, the planning group particularly, about how are we in there on day one? Where will the bus stop be? How nice will it be? How can we get as many of your folks in there? So I just want to say in as reassuring terms as I can, we're pursuing every angle of it that we know how to do, but there is still that fundamental underlying weakness of demand.
Thanks, sir.
Any other questions? I do have one quick one. I was looking at the cost per boarding. It was $609 pre-pandemic, the final month before it hit, and then we're at $1063. How much of that can we account for as actually also incorporating inflation? Like if we were at 609 then, what would actually have been the inflationary, and are we maybe closer to the mark than we think we are? Or is that not a question germane?
I think it's a good point. I think if you look at just about everything we pay for right now, we're approximately 20% higher than we once were, COVID as to now. So I think there's a correlation there. I don't know if it's an exact science, but I think it's close.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is our low-no update, and that's Ms. Dina Reed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 97, staff has prepared an update brief for information regarding the low-no grant. So as you all remember, in January 2024, the board authorized us to submit grant applications related to hydrogen fuel cell buses, a hydrogen facility, hybrid buses, et cetera. We were fortunate to receive an award midsummer for that. And since then, staff has been actively pursuing obligation of the grant, which is where we secure the grant, where we're able to start spending money and actually get reimbursed from the FTA. As you know, in November, the climate has changed a little bit. The presidential election has changed the administration. Since then, we have heard back and forth pieces of information about what may happen to discretionary funding in general related to transportation or other sources. As we all know, different administrations have different focus areas and things that they want to spend money on. There is some discussion and concern that the incoming administration may be looking to claw back funds from funds that are unobligated. So our goal has been from the first day we got that award until now to follow every possible step to get that funding obligated as soon as possible. It is still unobligated. We are working with the FTA to submit our application to obligate the award. We are waiting for a TIP amendment, which will occur on December 23rd. That's required before we can submit our application. As soon as that's completed and available to us and all approved and all the approvals that are necessary, which we expect to be by the end of the year, we will attach that to our application, and hopefully FTA will be available to send it through over the holidays. We do expect to have it moving forward by January or hopefully the first week of January, before the incoming administration takes office. From there, it will be completely out of our control in terms of it has to go to headquarters in Washington, D.C. It has to go to the Department of Labor for final obligation, and we're hoping we're kind of in with everybody else trying to obligate these funds. I know for a fact that DDOT is also waiting for the same TIP amendment that we are with SEMCOG. So we're all in this together. We could get jammed up. It could delay. There's no guarantee in terms of what will happen, either with the incoming administration or how long the application will actually take to get obligated. But I think we're in as good a position as we could be. We have hit every deadline along the way that there is in order to get this money obligated as soon as possible. The one other thing I would add is that transportation is not viewed to be as the major target for clawing back funds. So even if that is something that the administration or the incoming administration is going to do or considers, it may not be their first order of business. They may have other things that are higher on their priority list. So we're just being as diligent as we can to get the money obligated as soon as we can, recognizing that's a part of the equation that we don't have any control over at all. And we will keep you informed as we go forward. We'll give you another update in January to let you know where we're at in the application process. But that is our update for today.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments for Dina? Seeing none, thank you very much. We'll move on to the CEO report. That's Matt Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. CEO report's on page 99, my goodness. I won't go through it, and I am going to ask Jeff to give us a legislative update, and then George to say something about our after-school program today. But if you were to look at the formatting of the CEO report, you'll notice that the second gray bar, long-range plan status updates, and this kind of goes to what Raymond was saying earlier about how the long-range plan we are really bending the organization to include that in everything. So if you want to see monthly what the updates on those projects are that Raymond was discussing, you'll see them there. You'll notice in our corporate business plan every year, it's heavily bent towards the long-range plan. The plan is, in fact, the spine of it. The capital plan in the budget, you will see again, the long-range plan is there. So Raymond's correct, it very much is a to-do list. What I'll note in the CEO report, before asking Jeff to step up and tell us what the state Senate's up to right now, At the back end, execution of contracts over $250,000. There were 2 pertaining to the roof replacement for the garage. This is nuts and bolts stuff, but we just sort of signed some paperwork to get some people up there, I think, in the spring. It leaks pretty badly every time it rains, so it's more than time. And you have every year as board members, as well as I think myself and the executive team, we need to sign a personal disclosure form that we have no conflict of interests, that we're not on the payroll of anyone we buy stuff from. So you will be receiving those forms to sign probably in January. With that, I'll ask Jeff to tell us what's going on in Lansing right now, Jeff.
Thanks, Matt. I will try to keep this as succinct as possible. Wanted to just first, very brief federal government update. So I'm assuming everyone's seeing news of the looming potential government shutdown. I believe a couple months ago, we had mentioned that Congress passed a continuing resolution to provide funding to December 21st. That date is almost upon us now. A lot of conversations ongoing in Washington, D.C. about the proposed CR. President Trump and some of his allies have come out against the one that Speaker Johnson had been working on. So a President Trump-backed one was introduced today. It did not pass. So very much up in the air on what is going to happen with the CR. It is possible that it does not pass, and then we enter a government shutdown. I do want to note that FTA and other administrative things do continue running during a government shutdown. We'll see what happens tonight and into tomorrow with that. That's the easier one. Lansing is a bit of a mess right now. So this week in session, I don't even know where to start. Obviously, lame duck ongoing in Lansing, trying to pass all of the legislative priorities before the end of the year. The big thing in Lansing is going to be a change in one of the chambers. There was a 56-54 majority for the Democrats in the House. That is now going to be 58-52 for Republicans. With that majority, it is, again, very slim, so it only takes one member to really throw everything off. This week, we saw Republicans make the decision to not go to session. So that takes 54 off the scale right there. And then there was pushback from a very small number of Democrats. It ended up being one member in particular who made the stand to not go to session. Today, they invoked a call of the House order, which I've never actually seen. But basically, they bar the doors of the House floor and then try to go find the other members if they're in the building. That was not successful. So at about 1:30 p.m. today, the House did adjourn. They're set to go sine die in December 31st. So in the House side, a tremendous amount of legislation, potential supplemental funding deals, SOAR, as we had mentioned before, left all on the board. There were a few bills passed last week that have gone over to the Senate side. The Senate is having their own issues with caucus members not getting along and not wanting to vote on particular issues. They, however, still are in session. They were voting on items early this afternoon. It looks like they've gone in caucus and have been there for a number of hours at this point. I'm assuming having internal conversations about what the next step forward is. But we're monitoring a few things in the Senate right now, but a lot of the large items that we had been discussing, unfortunately, are dead due to the inaction, mainly on the House side. So that's basically in a nutshell what's ongoing. Unprecedented, I think, is a fair word to describe this. I have never seen this. One of the oddities was the Democrat member supposedly hid in a Republican member's office through the time. It was just odd. So very interesting, but that's kind of where things are standing right now. So we'll see what the Senate does this evening. Again, for our sake, nothing really pressing that we were monitoring.
Thank you, Jeff. And one more report from staff. George has an exciting bit of show and tell for all of us after the meeting today, and I wanted to give him just a moment to tell us what we're going to see and where we're going to see it.
Okay. Very exciting. Excited to share with you tonight that we have a surprise for you. One of the new buses is going to be parked outside for you guys to look at. I gave you a handout of some information regarding the new buses. On the front page, you see a picture of the Gillig facility out in Alameda, California. On the second page, I'm not going to go through every slide here, but one of the things that was really exciting going out and seeing the factory was their attention to detail and the processes that they use to build the bus. If you look at the bus on the second page, it's on a conveyor belt that moves every 22 minutes, and everybody has their job to do in that span of time to complete that bus. It's really a very impressive facility. Everything that we asked them to do to improve our bus, any type of a miss or a poor workmanship, they were very responsive and really helped to put a great bus out. While we were out there, we got to test ride the bus all over California. Really great experience, beautiful area with, beautiful mountains. The third page is one of the buses that were completed for Universal Studios. We really were impressed at the detail and how nice the buses looked at the end. Up on its stand, this was another station where they were installing various portions of the bus. One of the improvements I'm very excited about is on page 7, the outward-facing monitor. It allows the customers to realize that they are being their videos are being taken. It has proven to improve safety in the operations of a bus because people now realize that if you do anything foolish, it's going to be recorded and it could result in being prosecuted. Very impressed by the organization of the Gillig brothers and how the organization started. It was just a very impressive trip and the quality and workmanship that we saw within the facility. I did include a small design to front and back page, but then last but not least, I thought I would include this for you just to explain to you some of the 10 highlights of what we are improving within the bus. I think Jeff's team has done a fantastic job of making sure that the branding of the bus is very similar to Nova. We wanted the buses to look very similar so that we didn't have oddball buses running out in the industry or out in service. I think you'll be impressed by the clean look of the bus, the sportiness of the bus. The wheels look very good. I'm really proud to say I think the whole organization did a really good job of getting the design to look as it did. The new video system is robust. It's an improvement. The new seat layout, the new seating layout provides priority to our ADA customers with the Q-Pod wheelchair restraint system. Move forward the seating and eliminating the jump seat. The new seating layout further allows for one more seat per bus and still supports a stroller section for our family ridership. I won't read everything to you, but there's 10 major things here that are vast improvements to these buses. I just wanted to include that for you guys. You can take it home, and if you have any questions, just reach out, shoot me an email. I'll get you the information. But I'm really excited to be able to share that with you guys tonight. I'm going to go downstairs, and I'm going to try to get the bus logistically set up right outside the library for you. Right now, it's across the street in the first bay. So I'm going to excuse myself, go downstairs, and get that ready for everybody.
Thank you. What a nice unexpected surprise.
All right.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure. And that completes
Just
our
in case
report,
everybody's
and we're open for questions.
I don't know if this is one of those, like, what's the difference between the two images? Is it just the bottom skirting? Is the difference between A and B for the diagram here?
That's just a very early design I just included in the handout to you.
Yeah, no worries.
And I'm sure there'll be plenty of time for question and answers when we get on that bus. Awesome. Thank you again.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Matt, did you have anything else with your CEO report?
No, that is it. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Matt in regards to the CEO report? Seeing none, thank you very much. That moves us on to one more item of business, an emergent item. We are going to discuss CEO compensation. I know it feels a little weird to have this discussion with the CEO present, but we are very transparent, and we have done this every year, so let's give it a crack. In your board packet was the information, sort of like a little issue brief, and then the resolution. I sent an email out to all board members, I believe it was on Sunday, putting in the scope of how this decision was made by the governance committee, what metrics we used to have very thoughtful discussion to be able to bring this to the board this evening. And I won't read everything that's in there. I will share with you that we are asking for the board to consider a 3.5% cost of living increase, which is what the staff received according to the ASC, which is the American Employment Survey, Compensation Survey that is used, and that's what is also used by Korn Ferry, which was a metric that the governance committee used also in having discussions. We have also recommended a 4.5% merit increase to his salary. Both of these are to be retroactive to October 1. We took a lot of things into consideration when we made this. First of all, the last year has been a very stellar year for our organization. We are seeing rapidly improving issues within staff with new hires and things like that. We just received that $25 million grant, which was because the CEO stopped and listened to his staff and their recommendations. There were just so many good things that happened. He had an excellent performance evaluation. And so with all of those things, we feel that this is a fair compensatory rate. Are there any questions from anyone or concerns? And if not, would someone like to make a motion to put this resolution into effect?
Do we need to read the motion to put it in?
Do I need to read the resolution out loud? It's already in the board packet and available for the public, so.
Then I move the board accept Resolution 5, 2024, adoption of adjustment to compensation of Chief Executive Officer.
And it's seconded by Rich. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we will take the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And that passed unanimously with a little excitement. Very, very good. Thank you. Very good. We're going to move on to action item recap, and that is Ms. Hull.
Thank you. I just had 3 items, and they were all related to the ENDS monitoring report. The first was that I was going to email the board members so everyone has an updated ENDS survey, which includes the staff responses. The second was the ENDS monitoring report and survey are going to be added to committee agendas for the next month. And then the final is that the ENDS monitoring report is going to go to the January board agenda. That's when it'll be voted on. I didn't have anything else.
Did anybody catch anything else just to be on the safe side? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to topics for next meeting. We'll discuss Global Executive Limitations 2.0. Our board disclosure statements are due, as Mr. Carpenter pointed out. We will be discussing our annual plan of work. The procurement manual update notification is coming, and we will be meeting January 23rd at the Riverside Art Center in Ypsilanti, which now brings us to 9.3. Public comment. Is there anyone online, Deb?
We do not have anyone.
And Mr. Clark Chartneski, do you have any comment you'd like to make?
Just one short thing to add with regard to the bus stops. When you were looking over the cost per boarding, you saw for the scheduled service, line haul service, and for the A-Ride service, the demand response service, and you see there's a big difference. And so if the improvements to the bus stops encourages more people that presently use A-Ride to be able to use a line haul scheduled bus, there's a tremendous savings there. And that's one of the factors that should be considered in evaluation. Thanks.
Very good. That closes out public comment, and I would like to entertain a motion for adjournment. That would be Mr. Chang and Mr. Barr. All those in favor, raise your hands. Thank you very much. I want to wish everyone happy holidays and a very happy new year.
And the new Gillig will be somewhere immediately outside for anyone to have a look at. The public are welcome to. Thank you.